Welcome to week 1 of Introduction to Gambian Literature. Today we lay the foundation of our journey, beginning at the roots where the spoken word shaped memory long before the written page. This module will guide us through the oral traditions that birthed Gambian literature, the early written influences that colonialism brought, and the key figures who bridged two worlds. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and thank you for joining this literary journey. This course explores the evolution of Gambian literature from oral epics to contemporary writings. In this first module, our aim is to understand where Gambian literature begins with storytelling, history, rhythm, and the griot tradition. We will examine the forces, historical, cultural, and political, that shaped our early literary identity. Most importantly, this course asks you to reflect on your own heritage and recognize how literature has shaped and continues to shape the Gambian imagination. Our journey today is divided into four parts. The oral tradition, which is the bedrock of Gambian literature, the emergence of early written influences through mission schools and colonial administration, the role of colonial encounter in shaping and sometimes distorting local voices, and a comparative look at oral and written traditions. By the end, you will see how these threads weave together into what we call Gambian literature today. Gambian literature begins not with books but with voices. The griot, as we will call them, the jelly or gewel, was the first librarian, historian, philosopher, and entertainer. Their mastery of memory and performances preserved genealogies, moral lessons, epics, and social commentary across generations. This tradition is not simply artistic, it is the social glue of Gambian life and the storehouse of national memory. It is from this deep well that modern literature rises. Our literature is alive, it moves, it breathes, it depends on performance, gesture, rhythm, tone, decora, or balafon, carrying the story. It is deeply communal. Ownership does not belong to one author, but to the people. The storyteller adapts each performance to audience and occasion, making the story both timeless and new. So understanding these traits, therefore, helps us appreciate the transformation from oral to written text. Now, Gambian oral literature exists in many forms. We have the epics, such as the story of Kelefa Sane, or the legends of the Fuladu or Jola traditions. We have the proverbs, which is condensed in wisdom in a few words, and the folk tales that are often involving cunning animals, moral lessons, or social commentary, and also the praise poetry, which preserves the dignity and memory of families and historical figures, especially kings and traditional leaders. Each form reflects a different purpose: education, entertainment, moral instruction, or preservation of identity. When we listen to a griot, several features stand out. We see the repetition, the musicality, the dramatic pauses, and audience participation. All of you have certainly experienced, or many of you, probably not all, the Talin Dima, the Lebon, the Lupen, or the Talin, the Fuller Talin, and all of our cultures, they have it. And you understand that when the person, whether it is a griot, or an elderly person in the village, or your grandma, or your mom, or even your father, is narrating a story, a traditional story, that is part of the legacy of that community. You hear the repetition, you hear the musicality, you hear the dramatic pauses and audience performances participation. These elements help the story. It helps the story to, or the storyteller to remember long passages and help the audience internalize the message. In this course, we will return often to the idea that oral performance is as much a cultural ritual as a literary form. The arrival of written literature in the Gambia was not organic. It came through mission schools, European languages, and colonial structures of education. But literacy brought new opportunities. Local voices could now be recorded, preserved, and eventually published. For some of you who have never been there, you need to visit the National Archives of the National Center for Arts and Culture. Especially if you are Mandinka, you will read, you will listen to a lot of collected audio interviews by Bakari Sidibe, who has done an extensive research on oral traditions in the Gambia. The transition from oral to written text was gradual, often marked by European documentation of local stories, followed later by Gambians writing their own narratives. This is the moment when Gambian literature begins to take shape in print. So colonialism reshaped the landscape of literary production because Western education introduced the reading and writing in English, creating a new class of literate Gambians. You will notice that we can't read and write in our own languages yet. It has always been stalled for more than 60 years. We are still grappling with getting that right. So colonial administrators and missionaries documented our stories. One of those who has documented so much of our stories, which I have shared with you, is David Gamble. David Gamble has done extensive collection of our stories, and they are all documented, and you can read them all. But this interaction often opened a doorway through which later generations of Gambian writers would emerge, reclaiming their narratives and writing their own histories. Now, just to give you an example of one Gambian in the 18th century, Phyllis Whitley, who was taken as a child from the Senegambia region, because then there was nothing specific about Gambia and Senegal, who became the first African woman to publish a book of poetry in English. Remember, he was enslaved, so though enslaved, her mastery of literary form and classical rhetoric astonished 18th century America. Her presence reminds us that the literary potential of this region is centuries old, even if it was first expressed far from home. She stands as an early symbol of the Senegambian intellectual legacy. Sometimes Senegal claims her, and sometimes Gambia claims her. But as I said, it was pre-colonial. It was in the 18th century, that is in 17, I can't remember exactly which year. And therefore we can just claim her as a Senegambian. Then you have the early missionary writings. These missionaries produced catechisms, fables, and moral stories to teach reading and Christian doctrine. These texts were rarely literature in the modern sense, but they formed the earliest written materials accessible to Gambians. Gradually, you have local authors who began adapting oral stories into written form. We will discuss these authors, planting the seeds of Gambian literary authorship. This era forms the bridge between oral memory and written identity. Now, here we see the key differences. What is oral tradition? This is the dynamic, communal, musical, and ever-changing form, while the written tradition is fixed, individual, silent, and portable. Neither is superior, both are essential. To understand Gambian literature, we must appreciate how these two traditions intersect, influence, and enrich one another. Now, maybe I will take it a little further than that, so that I'll give you a little bit more on this, on the comparison. Because if you look at the two in a tabulated format, and you come to study them a little bit further, you will understand that when we talk about oral tradition, we do a performance. There's an interaction between the one narrating and the listeners. But when it's a written tradition, it's a read silently. When you look at oral tradition, it's dynamic and changing, while the written tradition is a fixed text. The oral tradition is a community-owned, the written tradition is an author-owned. Even if the story is taken from tradition, it becomes a copyright of the author. And then oral tradition is through multimedia, music, gestures, and a host of other things. There's body language, there's interaction, etc., as I mentioned. while written tradition is primarily textual. And last, where oral tradition is a memory-driven tradition, where it is transmitted from generation to generation. The written tradition is written, therefore it is documented and then stored as an archive. So these are very important to note because they all give the differences in both the written and the oral. And then going further, we know that even in the age of digital text, oral tradition remains the heartbeat of Gambian culture. If you notice the videos I have shared on the portal, they will help you understand this better. It shapes national identity, preserves collective memory, and provides philosophical grounding for our values. So contemporary writers, from land repeaters to current authors, continue to draw on oral forms in their work. So understanding oral tradition allows us to see the deep continuity between past and present. Now, this is the first reflective task. Think about the stories you grew up hearing, whether from the parents, grandparents, neighbors, or even a griot in your community. What makes those stories memorable? Was it the humor, the voice, the rhythm, or even the lesson learned from them? This reflection helps bridge your personal experience with the academic concepts we explore. Explore these in the attached videos on your classroom portal so that it helps you understand better, what this whole concept of oral traditions and written traditions are. Now, let us summarize today's insights. Gambian literature begins with vibrant oral tradition, and also it is a colonialism introduced literacy, written text, and new forms of expressions. We have already mentioned people like Phyllis Whitley, who reminds us of the region's early literary potential, and we have compared oral and written traditions which coexist and complement one another, and these foundations therefore will support everything we study throughout this course. So it's important that you follow closely as we continue the course. So your tasks for this week are to listen to the recorded Gambian folktale that is shared on the portal. Identify 3 features of oral storytelling found in the recording. Write a 200 to 250 word reflection on the role of oral storytelling in your community. Please submit through the classroom portal, and this reflection is your first step into becoming a scholar of Gambian traditions. All readings, audio and video materials will be provided through the portal and WhatsApp group. You are encouraged to explore additional folktales, griot performances, and storytelling traditions from across the Gambia. Exposure to these materials will enrich your understanding of how literature is rooted in lived experience. I have shared some of these videos, but just to give you a hint or two. For example, there is this story about Masane Sise. It's a Mandinka story of love. You need to explore and find out about it. There is this story about Ninki Nanka. It is also narrated. And there are griots also who do what we call historical stories. Now, when we call them historical, it means they have some element of history, but sometimes they are spiced up with a little bit of fantasy and a little bit of, bravado. So 2 stories come to mind, one very close to Gambia, which is the story of Sunjata Keita. So I have also shared a video on that. Listen through it. It's in English. But there is one in Mandinka that Ejali has shared with us, and that one is also going to help you better understand this storytelling in its different format. Because you see, when we talk about storytelling, we are really trying to make you understand that it is just beyond what we imagine. Because if you listen to the griot, where the history of the Nancho is narrated by Jeli Alajimbai, then you understand what we call historical fiction. Because historical fiction tells you a history of a people, but it adds a little bit of bravado, a little bit of spicing up to give you a kind of a lesson that a certain kind of people were brave, and to be brave you need to have certain criteria, etc., etc. So these are all very, very important. I've shared, if you look at your portal, a notebook that is going to give you several videos. You go through it, and then I'm sure you will be able to understand very, very well about storytelling. But as I said, continue to explore also beyond the notebook. Continue to explore on YouTube if possible, and you will be surprised to find that there are a lot of stories that are worth sharing. Thank you for joining me for this first lecture. In the coming weeks, we will deepen our exploration into colonial texts, post-independence writing, women's voices, and contemporary Gambian literature. May this course strengthen your love for enduring reading and your appreciation of our literary heritage. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdika ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayka. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.